All right, everybody, let's get started. Again, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We're going to hopefully just take up about a half an hour of your time, and in that half hour, talk for about 20 minutes about my book, and then have at least 10 minutes for questions. Again, a little quick commercial on who I am. Again, I'm Jonathan Baskin, and I've worked for some big brands you probably have heard of, Limited Ink, Nissan, and Blockbuster, and I was on the executive committee for the first iMac launch at Apple back last century. And I've also written a couple books about brands and marketing, and I write a column for Advertising Age, and I write a blog called Dim Bulb. And we're here today to talk about my latest book that just came out in January called Histories of Social Media. And the title is From Ancient Rome to Pro Wrestling. And that'll make sense in a minute, I hope. So what I want to do in the next 20 minutes, so then we have time for questions, is try to make 2 points to you. And the first point is that social media are not new phenomena. It's only the technology that changes. The second point I want to make is that if you buy this observation, and I think it is a fact, so it's not a question of opinion that you might agree with, I think it is demonstrably real, how might that change the way you look at using today's social tools? And I'm going to give you 4 thought starter ideas, not meant to be this is what you should go off and do, but just points maybe worth talking about and considering. So with that said, I also, in support of the book, and also just because I think it's really entertaining, is I write a daily blog post at historiesofsocialmedia.com called Today in the Histories of Social Media. I also record about a 2-minute long podcast. And what I try to do every day, every weekday at least, is find an event in history that evidence is really the point of my book, which is that behaviors stay constant, whereas it's only the technology that changes, and try to look at them in terms of what they meant to the society at the time and what they meant to social now. And interestingly, and not so surprisingly, today I made a post, and I want to start off by talking about it. On this day, in 1927, Herbert Hoover participated in the first live television transmission across a phone line. That's Herbert, Mr. Enigmatic. He was in Washington, and there were a bunch of folks collected at the AT&T Bell Labs in New York, and he was able to talk across the telephone line, and you can see a little box there. I presume that's the screen he was able to watch himself on. And this was a really big deal, right? Because it was the invention, if you will, the start of a network that would link people to one another, and they'd be able to communicate and they'd be able to share. I mean, this was, if you will, kind of like a groundbreaking moment in history. Well, not so much, because in fact, the groundbreaking moment had happened a couple decades earlier because telephones had already been invented. Telephones were and are an immensely social medium. You think about it. This technology enabled people an individual at home or in an organization to connect with an individual or at home or in an organization pretty much anywhere in the world that there were phones, and there were a lot of phones really quick. So in fact, the real aha moment for connecting people, for the networking people together, wasn't Herbert on the telephone line in 1927. It was really the invention of the telephone. We're talking late 1800s, beginning of the 20th century. Not so much. In fact, before that, the telegraph had done the exact same thing. And it's really interesting. There's a lot of writing about the telegraph that really evokes memories of, or evokes the way we talk about the internet now. The telegraph enabled people to communicate around the world. There were love affairs that took place via the telegraph. Groups could telegraph one another. There were not chat rooms, but there were communities were able to converse. So actually the telegraph was the first time that people were actually able to connect and communicate and share and be social. Except, of course, before that, there was the town crier. And there were communities that were able to communicate verbally. I mean, the town crier would state facts or announce news, and as you can see in this print, it was somewhere in Italy, I think, people would actually talk about it. They'd have opinions about it. They'd share it. They'd forward it. They'd refer it. They'd vet it. So, in fact, the town crier kind of really was the first social medium. Except that before that, and concurrent with that, there were books. And books were huge because books took the spoken word and sort of took them out of time and place and made them kind of eternal, so they could be shared very broadly. And if you look at the numbers of book printing and book adoption and literacy, soon after Johann Gutenberg came up with the press, it was just explosive. I mean, it makes internet adoption look really dinosaur-like in terms of speed. So in fact, books were really the first social medium. Well, before that, there were scribes. And actually, scribes were doing this kind of well into the Dark Ages. So the scribes were really communicating socially and allowing messages to be shared across vast distances and collaborate and add to it. But before that, you kind of get where this is going, and I'll wrap up the point in a second. There were ships. Ships were a network. Ships, the Phoenicians, the Venetians, they unified a Dark Ages and a Middle Ages world in a network that had information being shared across vast distances. Matter of fact, if you think about the Black Plague, it was a network virus. There'd be no Black Plague if there hadn't been ships connecting people and allowing them to get ill. And of course, before that, there was just the spoken word, and this is a shot of the Roman Senate. You have to think about society fundamentally is social. They're both based on the same Latin word, socius, which is allied or friend. So in terms of just networks, as a for instance, we've always had networks. We've always networked together. We've always communicated. The technology's changed, but the communicating hasn't. The technology affects the communicating, but it's an effect, not a cause. I think this is a really profound observation to make about the socialness that's inherent in our behavior, because social media really isn't about social media. It's about social and how and where that occurs and why. I mean, just thinking sort of post Herbert, obviously AT&T didn't get to own the pipes for TV. About the same time the FCC, they were doing that test, the FCC approved its first broadcast, the first broadcast station for television. But you got to think about, even before that, radio unified people in such a meaningful, real way that when Orson Welles ran his War of the Worlds piece, people ran out of their homes screaming. It was so real. It was so frightening to them. When we go a little further forward, this is Uncle Milty on the Texaco Star Theater in the 50s. This show was one of the first, if not the first, variety hours on TV in the early 50s. And it had a viewership of like 80% Nielsen rating. It had literally like every human being who had a television effectively watched this show. And for us now to even just think about this recent past and to kind of buy the conventional wisdom that this recent past was one-way communication and it was top-down and it really wasn't social at all. We're social now, but back in the 50s, everybody sort of watched this command and control thing, and when Uncle Milty said, pump Texaco into your cars, everybody dutifully applauded and obeyed. That's a lie. And it's either a lie on purpose because people are trying to sell you something, or it's a lie just because people are ignorant of what really happened. But even our recent past, the 1950s, was a rich time of social interaction. There were numerous networks that linked people together. Watching television was, just like it is now, a social experience. So again, my point being that for us to talk about social and only talk about technology is, I think, missing about 2,000 years of social fact. And you can look at it really in terms of every catchword, every phrase that we use now to talk about social media is really describing social experience that is 2,000 plus years old. Folklore is crowdsourced knowledge. Crowdsourcing is not a new idea. It's been with us since folks in the Middle Ages Dark Ages tried to find a cure for the plague. Home remedies are crowdsourced knowledge. Communities have been real forever. For us to come up now and come up with our own definitions of what a community means and define certain interactions as community-like ignores the fact that that's how kind of we've been living forever. And there's a rich history of why people join communities, what they get out of them, how they succeed and how they fail. And I find it fascinating that when we talk about our little sliver of now, online digital communities, we miss sort of the whole rest of history of communities and think we're going to make this stuff up from scratch. Same thing for engagement. Engagement now we kind of choose to define as an entertainment experience. Engagement is a way we pleasantly pass consumers' time. Through all of history, engagement was more of a necessity than a choice. It was something people did because they needed to change something, because they needed to affect a material change in their lives. People got engaged more because they had to than because they wanted to. And that's a powerful tool, which I'll talk about in a minute, in terms of what might be coming in the future for us. And finally, this idea of trust emerging as something that's somehow newly important now. It always was. It was always important to trust who was talking to you. People used to trust Uncle Milty, just like they used to trust that medieval monk who was writing down the revealed word of God. Trust has always been important and central to how we communicate and how we're social. So for us to now come up with new definitions of what that means, I think misses the point. We know what it means. We have thousands of years of experience of what it means. And it seems to me we should do a better job of using that knowledge and acknowledging it when we plan our go-forward plans. So from pro wrestling, from Coliseum to pro wrestling, when I was writing my book, I had this vision, not of these pop singers in the Coliseum, but I kind of thought, okay, here we are in the Coliseum. There's 50,000 people in the big one. There's gladiators whacking each other, trying to kill each other. There are, beasts ripping the limbs off of Christians or whomever else they've thrown to the lion's den. And everybody's in the audience kind of going, yeah, well, it's popular entertainment of the day. And I thought to myself, that's YouTube. It's the same behavior. It's the same experience. It's just communicated through a different medium. So I think the first point of this brief time we have together is this idea that I think we should talk about social behavior more broadly versus thinking that we are separate from the past. And one other quick thought, and these are kind of the ideas that I have fun with. Just because we're sitting here on the edge of the future doesn't mean that past generations weren't sitting on the edges of their futures too. So when those old guys were standing there with that gizmo, the Telegraph, and they're all the mustaches, and they're all wearing black, they thought they were on the cutting edge of tomorrow. And they were busy inventing what they thought was new and different for themselves. And we now, in retrospect, can look back and say, well, that's old. How didn't they know X, Y, Z? And it seems to me that every generation is always on the edge of the future. And it's up to us to be smarter about what the past thought and knew as we then invent that future of ours. So I want to make a couple thoughts now about what do we do with this. What does this mean, for instance? Point one, beware of crowds. Through all of history, up until about 1950, 1960, or probably IRC in the 70s, crowds were generally considered to be insane. I mean, Charles Mackay studied the French Revolution and kind of tried to figure out how did something that started out as the peasants wanting to have better prices for bread end up with 15,000 people with their heads chopped off and a calendar with new names for months. And he wrote in the 1840s, The Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Crowds have always been suspect. Crowds are easily led, they're easily deluded, they resort to lowest common denominator solutions and answers that may not necessarily be right or true. And up until pretty much our time, if we had said to folks running GM or folks running a government in the 1940s, let alone the 1840s, hey, let the crowd decide. The crowd is smart. The customer knows best. They would have laughed at us. And they wouldn't have laughed because they're stupid. They would have laughed because they knew that wasn't true. So the first thought I have for us is, and this is, people are going to want to rip me a new one on this one, but your customer actually doesn't know best. Your customer is not the person who should be running your brand or owning it. You are. That doesn't mean you don't respect them, you don't engage with them in meaningful ways, you don't talk to them, you don't share with them, but ultimately, this idea that we're supposed to give up our brands to the crowd is stupid. It is fundamentally flawed, at least if you care about all of history. Idea number two. Like I was saying earlier about boats and printing and town criers, networks aren't only online. We think that this network effect is being enabled by internet technology and our mobiles and mobile devices and what have you, but the reality is networks have always been everywhere and they're a part of our everyday lives, and I think we need to look not so much at the technology aspect of it, but the humanity living aspect of it. I harken back to the 1950s. This is not a picture of her, but there was a woman who worked for Tupperware, and her name was Brownie Weiss. And I talk about her in some detail in the book. And she came up with this idea of selling, which was, instead of running an ad saying, buy my stuff, she said, I'm going to get people together in a room who are kind of like me. I'm going to talk to them about their lives. I'm going to talk about what matters to them, the issues that matter. We're going to share ideas. I'm going to mention if there is a product that does perhaps answer some of these needs. And not only can they then buy the product, but they can actually sign on to be evangelists and go forward and help other people buy the product. Sounds like something somebody would come up with today. But she did it 60 years ago. So I think another observation for us as we think about planning and as we think about social media and social experience is we really got to get out of thinking that it's just about the internet and just about Facebook or mobile apps or what have you. It is not a technology solution. There is no technology solution. Technology is just a tool. It's the behavior that matters. And I wonder whether or not some of the, if not a lot of the technology answers we come up with about how we're just going to sort of laser focus find people so we can target them at the right place at the right time with the right thing kind of misses the point of understanding how people truly interact. I wouldn't talk to technologists about this. I'd rather talk to marketers. For that matter, I'd rather talk to philosophers about it. Point number 3, get ready for real engagement. There's no nice way to say this, but I think a lot of social campaigns are a bunch of hooey. And this idea that human beings, people, want to spend time doing pointless things for no reason is really sort of squandering what little goodwill anybody has toward any of our businesses or brands to begin with. The real power of the internet is only starting to emerge, and that power is people actually changing stuff. So instead of engaging with your brand to post videos on YouTube about what they've named your product or how happy they are about it, the peer-to-peer nature of the internet means that at some point, perhaps sooner versus later, people actually want to get engaged on where the hell you source your products, like in a meaningful, it matters way, or in what are, in fact, your business's policies on human resources or on bereavement leave or whatever those details are. I mean, bear in mind that when people used to get engaged in the late 1800s, it was joining unions to change the workplace. Imagine consumers doing that now. So it's not just telling you what flavor of soda pop they'd like next, but truly holding you accountable, your business accountable for what it does. When we look at the successes we see in digital media, they're primarily when they move from the friending space to the space of reality. You know, meetup.org is a big deal because people actually went off and did things. Contrast that to how many people sat in their comfy chairs and turned their Facebook pictures green in support of the Iranian dissidents during the last election. The latter is not engagement. It's a waste of time. The former is engagement. And I think that we as marketers and as business people need to be aware of this kind of engagement. It's not enough to be silly anymore. And a lot of the things, as a matter of fact, I just read that the social media awards, something in Ad Age, was on the homepage, announced all these winning things, and the primary criteria is how much time you were able to waste, how many people you were able to reach and then waste their time. And I just think that real engagement means actually honoring that time and giving them something meaningful. Because ultimately, idea number 4, entertainment is not branding. You can't own funny or sexy or hilarious. We've known this forever. There's a guy back, one of my role models when I was growing up, David Ogilvy, who wrote a lot about the idea that the point of marketing and of advertising in particular wasn't to entertain. It was to sell stuff. And it wasn't supposed to be art. So if your goal is to create what we now call content, which is a fancy way of saying stuff with no purpose, there's a long canon of knowledge and insight that says that's stupid. And most of the brand marketers back before the invention of social platforms were busy struggling with, why would you want to run an ad on television that didn't sell anything? Selling stuff is actually not a bad thing. The challenge is just how to do it authentically, legitimately, credibly. So this idea that our job as marketers and communicators is to pleasantly occupy people's time, I think is false. Our job as marketers is to define what the business really does that really matters, and then put a label on it. That's branding. I wrote my first book was Brownie Only Works on Cattle. It's ultimately just it's a stamp on reality. So that's the logo for Delft China. Terrible logo. But it doesn't matter because the logo doesn't matter. What mattered was it was Delft China, which meant it was made a certain way, available in a certain place, did XYZ, came in certain configurations. And I think that one of the real ahas of social experience throughout history has been reality matters. And I think we need to try to migrate our digital experience closer to that reality instead of thinking somehow we're above it or separate from it or that we can somehow manipulate it, because we can't. So anyway, I'm about done. I wrote about this in some excruciating detail, hopefully entertainingly so, in my book, Histories of Social Media. These are actually the French revolutionaries finding one of their great scribes, Marat, having been murdered by the woman who was giving him his bath. And really what I'm going to leave you with is this idea is maybe what's old really the new. And in fact, are the big ahas for social media development for the next 18, 24 months or the foreseeable future, in fact, us doing a much better, more legitimate job of grasping the truisms from the past. So with that said, I think I did it in about 20 minutes. I'd like to open it up for questions. And again, we can have questions here. And also, if you want to reach out to me separately or in addition, my contact information is here up on the screen. And I would love to hear from you. So I think you can, oh, there we go. So David Heiser is saying, which companies do you think have the best understanding of how to use social media to influence social behavior? God, it's a hard one. I think the ones that are doing the best job are the ones that aren't doing it consciously or just purposefully as social media. Because again, all media is social. So behavior is social. I think Amazon, it's an easy one because the very experience of Amazon is a social experience. And it has social connectedness embedded in it. So I go and I pick a book and there's recommendations and referrals and ratings and what have you. It is a very social experience, as is their customer service. Other than that, I'm not certain that a lot of companies have really figured out that social is not a marketing campaign. So I would say we still got a hell of a lot of work to do. I'm about to start a master in, Marie Lyon Gendron from Montreal says, I'm about to start a master in e-business. What would you suggest I focus on as a marketer? Yeah, good question. I think business. I think finance. I think the more you know about the operations of a business and how businesses are run, I have the bias that I think we marketers do, which is we grow up in a liberal arts environment, and we think because we appreciate poetry and art that we also happen to know how to run companies better than those numbnuts who crunch numbers and worry about things like supply chain and distribution networks and all that stupid stuff. Turns out actually they have their own philosophy too, and whether it's expressed in statistical controls or simply in how they make things operate. I think the more that you as a marketer know about finance and operations, the better marketer you'll be. The marketing part is kind of vocational. I think you can learn that on the job, and you can learn that by taking a couple classes. But being a smart, shrewd, insightful business person, that takes a lot of work. Chris, since you can't own sexy or funny, what kinds of things can you own? You can own what your business does. You can own the reality of what your business does. And I think that's an incredibly empowering, powerful opportunity, but it's frightening to marketers because, again, we're used to making stuff up and trying to own it. But I think the real aha is that social platforms, today's social platforms, differently than the past, really enable us to own, because we can communicate and share the things our businesses really do. So I think it's actually a wake-up call to say, how do you go back to being unique, better, faster, cheaper, smarter than your competition? It's less about who has the funniest spokes character and more about who actually performs better. It doesn't have to be boring and dull, but it does have to be based in reality. I think that's the challenge, is how do you own reality, which means how do you kind of refocus back into what the business really does. Marie said, I didn't get her question right. Okay, what are some of the hot topics I should focus on in order to incorporate Web 2.0 in my future marketing strategies? Yeah, I hate to sound boring, but I get back to, I think you should focus on things that aren't hot or are lukewarm, which is how does operational business reality measure and truly incorporate social? Again, there's a giant body of Web 2.0 methodology, ROI, and assorted blather that says, here are the metrics. I mean, even the made-up word metrics. Here are the metrics of social media. I think they're all pretty much worthless. So Old Spice can engage with, almost the entire population of the United States with its YouTube promotion, but they can't actually tell you how it sold anything. They can tell you it's not supposed to, but they can't tell you how it actually sold stuff. What sold stuff were the brilliant commercials and the great in-store promotions, which is all great, but that's all 1960s marketing, advertising. So I would say study how the business measures the effect of its various activities, whether it's cost-cutting or top-of-the-line revenue. Be a finance business person. Again, the Web 2.0 stuff, so much of it is just glib nonsense. And I think that's probably part of the disconnect with a lot of the leadership in these organizations. We like to think it's, CEOs aren't smart enough and CMOs aren't spending enough money on social because they just don't get it. Could it be maybe they do get it and we don't? Britta, do you agree that social media really is to build a brand than to increase your ROI? I'm not certain I buy this idea that you can build a brand without selling stuff. Again, through all of history, especially in the immediate past into the 20th century, the premise that you could build a great brand and not sell greatly, again, was idiotic. I mean, it didn't exist. It was actually the other way around. If you sell a whole bunch of stuff, that means you have a great brand. So I think we use this excuse at saying, well, social isn't really necessarily supposed to sell. It's just supposed to have a return on investment that's measured somewhat esoterically, and that somewhere, sometime, somehow, someday, someone will buy something because of it. That's not marketing. That's wishful thinking. So I'm not saying that every social experience has to immediately sell X number of products or it isn't worth it, but I certainly think the dotted line could be a hell of a lot shorter, and possibly even a direct one, a solid line more than once. Jerry, I'm presuming you can all read this, but I'll read it really quick. So people have been social animals, and they're pretty smart. Technology has changed things, not only from the standpoint of reaching people, but how they've changed. They themselves have not changed. Before DVRs, which give people the right to fast forward, they would ignore the message or receive it and think how dumb the marketer comment. It's interesting. People couldn't avoid the commercials. I mean, you had to walk out of the room, or you hit the mute button, which was a great invention that didn't happen until I was well into my 20s. I think the DVR has given everybody the opportunity to skip marketing and skip the messages. I'm not certain what the question is. I think dumb marketing and dumb advertising, just like dumb viral stuff, is equally ignorable however you encounter it. And while I can avoid the dumb commercial that might have wasted my time, it may have made me chuckle. And I would argue that probably more than one of those creative ideas surfaces on the internet as a viral video, and somebody sends me a link and I look at it and chuckle. I still don't think that's necessarily connecting with me in any meaningful way that leads to a behavior that matters. But I'm a big DVR fan. I think it's huge. And also, I also skip a lot of content, a lot of the setup and plots. I like to get to the action. David, with entertainment marketing getting so much praise in the press, how can we convince decision makers they're really wasting their marketing budget? Yeah, damn good question. Because again, it seems to me that really the onus should be on the folks trying to claim that it matters. It's like we have to prove a negative. Entertainment marketing is a waste of money because it's a waste of money. Because there's no proof that it does anything. So that doesn't mean that you can't come up with marketing that's entertaining, but entertainment marketing or branded content, or again, this word content, which I hate, because it's a technology term for filler. It's the stuff you put on the technology platform. It used to be called information, used to be called drama, whatever. It was a thing. Now it's just a placeholder. But I would say, I mean, what I've done with clients is I've literally said, I'd like to flip the question. Help me understand why you think the entertainment marketing pays you. Show me how it pays you. I'd like to understand it. Because truthfully, maybe I don't get it. And I do mean that sincerely. It's nonsense. It doesn't pay. Never did. Tim, because our younger generation is so engaged in social networks, will they understand what an in-store promotion is? Absolutely. Why do you think nobody trusts brands anymore? Why businesses have about as much credibility as the government or worse? After all this engaging, by the way, and after all this use of social media, young people, though I think they're stupid in a lot of respects, just like I was stupid when I was a young person, I'm differently stupid now that I'm an old guy. They'll get an in-store promotion because they still get the value of a dollar and that they only have X number of dollars in their pocket or in their bank account. And I think we're seeing that in that the glorious successes of Twitter are when businesses offer price promotions. So whether it's tweeted out or it's apparent in store, I think the reality of price fills the gap that all this nonsense about content and engagement and participation, what have you, can't fulfill. The value of a dollar is still readily apparent. The value of all the rest of that stuff, we have to do some complex calculations, and maybe people pay for it, maybe they don't. So I think in-store is huge. I think in-store and also the retail experience as an experience of reality is, again, doesn't get enough credit, doesn't get enough respect in this day and age. It should, because that's where a lot of decisions are made. Oh, thank you. Feel free to wrap this up. Okay, I'm going to take one more question, two more, and then we can wrap it up. And then, again, I would love to continue this conversation with anybody individually, or we can all get together again sometime. We can figure it out. What do I think the value of Facebook is? It's the AOL of the 2010s. So the value of it right now is that, like AOL back before Time Warner bought it, it is effectively a portal. It is effectively where I go to get a bunch of stuff channeled to me. I'm not certain it has a financial model, and I'm not certain that something doesn't replace it sooner or later. I will give you a quick heads up. My 16-year-old daughter and all of her friends haven't been on it for months. And I don't know if any of you have been seeing this either, but it's over as far as that generation is concerned. Finally, we're lucky to get customers by contract. Yeah, what can we offer to share generate interest? Love it. It's a great question. What can we do to generate interest? How do we generate leads? I get back to, if you're running a really stupid video on YouTube, it's not going to generate a lot of leads. You know, when Ford Motors' big aha for the Fiesta is to encourage its people it's given cars to post dumb videos and then counts viewers of those dumb videos as potential leads, again, somebody should call them on this stuff because it's stupid. The other hand, if you take responsibility for your brand and you take responsibility for the business reality of what you do, there's a vast majority, wealth of information that you could share with the world that could be relevant to a future decision maker. You know, the B2B folks do this all the time, and they do it naturally because you can't get away with a lot of hype when you're building manufacturing with tolerances. But the idea would be that if you're in the China company, you're in the wine company, you should definitely create information and share it that's authoritative, transparently so, and that enables your customers to be better customers, whether they shop with you or not. It blows me away that I have trouble in any industry category of naming the go-to authority for information for that category. Here we are with the immense publishing tools that today a company could use to own the reality of their business and by default set the agenda for their industry category. And so few of them do. So again, I would say be an expert on what you're supposed to be an expert on, which is what you make and what you sell. And let the agency with the wacky idea for being funny and engaging, sell it to your competition and let them piss away their knowledge and money on that. And you talk to people about really good stuff. Again, be hilariously funny about it. Be creative, but be real. Okay, I'm done. Thank you very much. And please reach out to me, and I'd love to if you'd visit my stuff. And again, really enjoyed this, so thank you very much.